They say time forgets everything out in the desert. The wind scrapes names off gravestones, and the sun bleaches wood and memory alike. But in Elms Hollow, there's one morning each year that time remembers. A single red rose appears by the boulder near the old dry creek, where no roses grow and no hands are ever seen leaving it. Once, that stretch of trail was just dust and rock, leading from the Mercer's ranch into town. On that trail, Caleb Mercer rode clean-shaven and proud, dressed in a charcoal suit that still bore the creases of its box. His boots, newly polished, clicked against the stirrups like they'd been waiting a lifetime to carry him somewhere holy. His hat was white, tipped back just enough to show his eyes that looked calm, like a storm had passed through and left peace in its wake. People knew who Caleb was, and they knew who he had been. Years before, he'd ridden with a gang that went by many names. Most of them whispered, most of them feared. Blood had followed him across 2 territories, but never once into Elms Hollow. He left that life behind with a bullet wound in his side and the preacher's daughter at his bedside. And when he woke, fevered and broken, it was Annalise Rourke who sat there, cool cloth in hand, refusing to flinch from his pain or his past. Their love was not the kind that bloomed loudly. It didn't need the town's blessing. But still, the town gave it slowly, in nods and half-smiles. Folks saw the way he worked, quiet, steady, never cutting corners. They saw how she never walked a step behind him but beside, head high, eyes forward. On the morning of their wedding, the whole town was set to gather at the chapel. The old preacher, her father, was already there, hands trembling slightly over the pages of his Bible. Annalise stood in the back room of the chapel, wearing her mother's dress, its lace yellowed but elegant, her fingers wound tightly around a small bouquet of desert blooms. She was not nervous, but still, she kept looking toward the door. Caleb never arrived. At first, it was brushed off as a delay, a thrown shoe, a lost boot. Then someone spotted his horse, riderless, trotting down Main Street, saddle empty and reins trailing. Silence took the chapel like smoke. No one moved. Annalise walked outside without a word. She looked at the horse, then at the horizon, then back to the saddle. There was blood on the leather. It was Deputy Mason who found the body. Caleb lay face down near the boulder by the old creek bed. One shot to the back, execution style. His hat was lying beside him, white turned red. No sign of a struggle, no tracks but his own. Whoever did it knew the land, knew him. They waited for him. They meant it to be final. There was no trial, no suspects, just whispered speculation. Some said it was the gang, the old one he'd run with, tying up loose ends. Others thought it might have been a bounty hunter with no interest in explanations. There were even those who muttered that maybe Caleb hadn't changed at all, and this was justice, not murder. But none said that loud. Not near Annalise. She buried him herself, refused to let the undertaker's boys touch him, dug the hole with blistered hands, and lowered him in without a single tear on her face. When the preacher read his words, her eyes stayed on the dirt, unmoving. When it was done, she stood alone, and the town stayed back, out of respect, out of fear. Spring turned to summer, and the whispers quieted. The Mercers' ranch sat empty, the windows shuttered, the gates closed. Annalise moved back to her father's house, or so folks assumed. No one saw her much after that. Then came the anniversary. No one marked it, not openly. But early that morning, someone noticed a red rose at the boulder where Caleb had fallen. Not a wild desert flower, but a true rose, fresh, crimson, laid with care. No note, no footsteps, just the bloom, bright as spilled blood against the stone. The next year, it appeared again, and the year after that. Some children dared each other to stay out the night before, to see who brought it. None ever did. Grown men claimed it was a ghost. Some believed it was a lover from Caleb's past, repenting too late. But none said what many quietly suspected. Each year, the town paused on that day. The saloon kept its doors shut until noon. The church bell rang once, just once, and Annalise Rourke, now called Miss Rourke again, kept to herself behind closed doors. But always, the rose was there. No one saw her do it. No one ever would. Still, There were those who remembered the way she looked the day of the funeral. Not broken, not lost, but something else, something colder than grief. A fire banked under ash. And somewhere beyond town, far out past the canyon's reach, men who'd once ridden with Caleb Mercer were vanishing. One by one. The second disappearance came in the spring rains. A man named Judd Hollis was found face down in a wash 30 miles west, his boots gone, throat cut clean. Folks remembered Judd from years back, mean-tempered, scarred from neck to wrist, always smelling like gun oil and guilt. He'd ridden with the old Mercer gang, or so it was said. He vanished on the same day Caleb had been gunned down, and when the marshal rode out to check the spot, he found a rose nearby, placed just out of the water's reach. It didn't take long for patterns to form. Men tied to the gang, those who had melted into the vastness of the frontier after their crimes, started turning up dead, quietly, methodically, always around the same time each year, and always with a rose, sometimes fresh, sometimes wilting, but unmistakably there. Nobody said it out loud, but after the third, the whispers turned sharper. It was Annalise. Had to be. Who else would know the names of those ghosts from Caleb's past? Who else would hold that kind of silence like a blade? She never changed her rhythm. Ran errands twice a week into town. Always alone. Always with her hair in a modest braid, a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face. She didn't smile, but she wasn't cruel. She nodded to the butcher, tipped the stable boy, and when children got too curious, she warned them off with a look that carried more weight than shouting. Behind the Rourke house, an old shed once used for storing tools, now held things the town didn't see. Maps, ledger books filled with names, dates, and arrows scrawled in ink. A box of weapon parts. Caleb's revolver, cleaned weekly, reloaded monthly. She never wore it on her hip, never carried it openly. But it was never far. The war she waged wasn't loud. It wasn't a storm. It was drought, slow, withering, undeniable. She tracked the men who had once ridden with Caleb, the ones who had left him for dead or profited from his reform. Some had gone straight, others hadn't. She found both kinds, and it didn't matter. What mattered was whether they'd known, whether they'd pulled the trigger or stood close enough to hear the shot and walked away. She began with names Caleb had once mumbled in fever. Others came from old posters, buried records, a memory of a scar or a laugh described in too much detail for it not to sting. She followed trails through canyons and badlands, up through mining towns and collapsed hideouts. Her hands, once known for embroidery and turning pages of hymnals, grew rough with rope and dust. Her eyes, sharpened like a whetstone, had touched them. She didn't ride a fast horse, just a steady one. Didn't wear black, didn't strike from the shadows. She walked right into camps with a kettle and a rifle. Poison coffee here. A clean shot there. A quiet shove off a ridge in the dark. None saw her coming. Most didn't see her at all. Back in Elms Hollow, the townsfolk spoke less and watched more. They never saw her leave, but somehow they always knew when she was gone. The postmaster would hold her letters. The grocer would stack her order in a crate by the back door. And when the news of another outlaw's death reached them, through a passing drifter or a deputy from the next county, they said nothing, just looked toward the edge of town, toward the trail that led past the chapel and into the hills. Only one man dared ask her outright. Sheriff Ben Alcott had known Annalise since she was a child. He'd been the one to carry her home the day her mother died. He'd seen her stand beside Caleb, with eyes fiercer than most men carried to war. One morning, after the 5th killing, he rode out to her father's house with more weight on his badge than he'd ever felt before. She was in the garden, clipping dead stems from a rose bush that never bloomed right since Caleb's funeral. He didn't dismount. "You know why I'm here," he said. She didn't look up. "Then you know there's no need to ask. It won't stop them all." She straightened, brushed her skirt off, and met his eyes. "No, but I'm not trying to stop them all. I'm trying to reach one." He waited, but she didn't say more. He tipped his hat and rode off, and neither of them spoke of it again. That night, someone broke into her shed. A stranger, lean, snake-eyed, moved like he thought he was clever. He came looking for gold, maybe, or secrets. Maybe he thought, She was an old maid with grief in her bones and dust in her mind. What he found was a snare set at ankle height and a hammer to the jaw. When he came to, his hands were tied and his lips were bloodied. Annalise sat across from him, not angry, just tired. She asked him questions. About who sent him. About what he knew. He lied twice. The third time, she pressed a knife to the spot, just below his ear, and told him to remember this moment every time he thought of hurting a woman. She left him tied to his own horse and sent both toward the next county with a note pinned to his shirt. Not her. Not now. Not ever. It was around then the story started. Not just in Elms Hollow, but in towns too. 3 days right away. Stories of a woman in a dove-gray coat, with fire in her eyes and vengeance in her heart. Some said she rode with ghosts. Some said she was one. But most agreed. Wherever that rose showed up, a reckoning followed. Still, Annalise kept no trophies. She sent no letters, made no boasts. The only thing she did, always, without fail, was place a rose by the boulder on the day Caleb died. It wasn't for him alone. It was for the promise they'd made, for the life cut short, for the justice the law refused to deliver, and for the man she hadn't yet found. The one she truly believed pulled the trigger. The one who ran farther than the rest. The one Caleb never named. Her war was quiet, but it was far from over. The third time Annalise found the rose trampled, she knew he was close. The last of the men on her list had died the year before, an aging drunk who'd set fire to a stable during a card game, his final words slurred and useless. But this wasn't the wind or an animal. The petals were crushed under a boot heel, deliberate, taunting, and though no one had seen him, she felt the chill of his presence settle in her bones like early frost. Caleb's killer had returned, not one of the many who helped, not a boy swept up in someone else's cruelty. This was the man who'd fired the shot, the one Caleb had never named, the one whose face never made it to a wanted poster. She could feel it in the air, thick and leaden, like before a storm. Only this storm had waited 14 years to return. Annalise spent the following days in silence. She rode farther than usual, deeper into the canyons past Copper Ridge, retracing old trails Caleb once spoke of with reverence and warning, where they'd camped under the stars, thinking about land and cattle and names for their first son. She looked for signs, ashes too fresh in a fire ring, prints too heavy for deer, the smell of tobacco Caleb had hated but others swore by. Nothing obvious, but enough to know someone was watching. When she returned to Elms Hollow, she didn't go home. She went to the church. The chapel hadn't changed. White paint flaking under the sun, wooden pews warped from decades of heat and sorrow. She walked in like she belonged there, because once she had. She lit a single candle, knelt, and whispered the name she never spoke aloud. Then she said another, Malcolm Reyes. It wasn't a prayer. It was a sentence. Malcolm had once been a friend to Caleb, a partner in the cattle runs. Tall, dark-eyed, always smiling too wide. He'd vanished just weeks before the shooting. No word, no goodbye. Later, when Caleb lay bleeding in the dirt, he tried to speak something between coughs. Malk, but the words never finished. For years, Annalise believed it was regret. Now she saw it as a clue. That night, the sheriff's office caught fire. The blaze woke the town with a crackle like cannon fire. Smoke choked the sky. Alcott and 2 others worked to save the ledgers and rifles, but it was the jail cell that burned hottest. Inside, they found a man, unkempt, thin, eyes bulging in terror, who'd been locked up for theft. His mouth stuffed with cloth, a note pinned to his chest. You asked too many questions. Alcott didn't need to guess. He came to Annalise's farm the next morning. You stirred him up, he said. I didn't stir anything, she answered, her hands buried in feed. He's been watching, waiting. Alcott looked toward the hills. You know what he wants. She nodded. Me. The sheriff frowned. Then maybe it's time we gave him what he wants. 2 nights later, the trap was set. Annalise rode out alone at dusk, wearing her old wedding dress. Not white. Caleb had always joked she looked better in red. The fabric faded now, but it still clung to her like memory. Her revolver was hidden beneath the folds, a knife tucked at her ankle. She left a trail wide enough to follow, straight through the flatlands west of Hollow Creek. She camped beneath the stars and lit no fire. She didn't sleep. By midnight, she heard the footsteps. Soft at first, then bolder. Someone confident, maybe believing she didn't know. She let the silence stretch, listening as he circled. Closer, closer still. Then she turned her head slightly and said, "You're later than I expected." The voice that answered wasn't aged by time. It was smooth, cruel, amused. "I heard you've been planting flowers for old ghosts." She stood slowly, her hands empty, the knife still hidden. Only for one. Malcolm Reyes stepped from the dark. His hair was silver at the temples, but his posture was untouched by age. He looked like a man who'd spent years winning at cards and cheating death. But his eyes, those eyes, were hollow. "You've been busy," he said. She shrugged. "You made a list for me." "You think Caleb was clean?" he snapped. "You think he didn't ride with us? You think he didn't pull a trigger or two?" "I know what he was," she said. "And I know what you did to him." Reyes laughed. He was going to leave. Marry you. Start a life. He forgot we weren't done with him yet. "That's why you shot him." "No," Reyes said. "I shot him because he looked me in the eye and said I wasn't worth following." That was when she drew. The revolver barked once. Reyes stumbled back, clutching his side, eyes wide with rage and surprise. He drew too, faster than she expected, but his hand shook. The bullet missed by inches. Hers didn't. When it was over, she stood above him, breath heavy, the smell of blood and desert thick in the air. He lay on his back, mouth open, the rose she'd tucked in her saddlebag fluttering to the ground beside him. "You never deserved his loyalty," she said. He didn't answer. She buried him where he fell. No marker, no stone, just a rose placed gently in the dirt. The final one. She rode back to Elms Hollow before dawn, and for the first time in 14 years, the path behind her stayed quiet. Each spring, just before the frost lifted for good, Annalise rode out alone. Elms Hollow had grown quieter with the years. The cattle runs had dwindled, the saloon closed, and younger families moved toward the rail lines. What remained were those bound by memory or land. Annalise was both. She never remarried. The townsfolk had stopped asking after the first decade. Some whispered it was grief. Others said she was too fierce, too solitary. Children called her the Rose Widow, not knowing why. But every year, on the day Caleb fell, she'd place a single red bloom where the blood once stained the dirt. And every year, without fail, the petals stayed whole. Until that final one. Now, with Reyes buried far from view and his secrets silenced beneath dust and root, the valley held a different stillness, the kind that settled after justice had its say. Yet peace, for Annalise, was never easy. She didn't wear it like a badge or a ribbon. She wore it like a scar, quiet, always there, sometimes aching in cold weather. She rebuilt the barn that summer. Alone, of course. Her mare, Willow, kept close as she worked, hammering beams, replacing roof slats. It wasn't about utility. The barn was never for cattle anymore, but it had been Caleb's dream to fix it. She'd let it rot for years. Now she brought it back with the same grit she used to bury men. One afternoon, the sheriff came by, older now, eyes a little dimmer, had always tilted too far back. "You ever think of selling?" he asked, half joking. She wiped her brow, stepped back from the frame. "You ever think of minding your own?" Alcott chuckled, nodding. "Town misses you. You know, at church, festivals. You used to win every pie contest." She gave a tired smile. "Those days feel like someone else's story." "But they weren't," he said. "That's the thing." She didn't answer, but that evening, she found herself at the chapel. Just her and the pews, and the sound of wind nudging the door. She didn't light a candle. She sat, hands folded, thinking not of the man who died, but the boy who once rode with her through rainstorms, arguing over the name of a dog they never got to own. He would have liked the barn. That night, she dreamed of roses. They weren't in the dirt or on graves. They were growing wild along the fence line, vibrant and untamed. When she woke, the smell lingered. She followed it outside, half chiding herself for superstition. Yet at the gate, resting atop the post, was a bloom. Fresh. Full. Not one petal wilted. Her breath caught. She searched the horizon. Nothing but hills and sky. But there was no fear. No weight of danger. Just something strange. Something she didn't yet understand. Days passed. Then weeks. The rose remained perfect until the wind finally took it. When spring returned, she rode out as always. This time, the path was not one of vengeance, but memory. She brought 2 roses, one for Caleb, one for herself. She placed his where he fell. She placed hers where she'd stood, 14 years later, under moonlight and fury, and took her life back. On her way home, she saw the boy. He was maybe 12, wiry and sunbrowned, leading a goat too stubborn to follow. "Ma'am," he said, tipping a battered hat. She nodded. "Out far." "Looking for springs," he replied. "Pa says there's one near Widow's Ridge." "That's east." "I thought this was east." She pointed with her chin. "That way's east. You're south." The boy looked sheepish. "Guess I was following my boots more than my head." She smiled, the corners of her mouth lifting without ache. "That's how most folks get lost." He grinned and started off, but paused. "You're the Rose Widow, ain't you? That what they call me?" He shrugged. "Heard my uncle say you got a ghost husband, that he walks on that hill come sundown." "Did your uncle tell you why?" The boy shook his head. She considered for a moment, then said, "Because sometimes love doesn't die proper. It stays. In the land, in the wind, in the people who remember." The boy's eyes widened. "Is that true?" "It is for me." He tipped his hat again. "Hope I find something like that someday." She watched him go, his goat protesting every step. That night, she wrote a letter. She hadn't written one in years. Not since Caleb. But she sealed it anyway and tucked it in a wooden box beneath the floorboards. The rose that had been left at her gate was pressed between the pages. Someday, she knew, someone would read it. They'd want to know the story of the woman who never left, of the outlaw whose grave held no name, of the love that planted itself in the soil and bloomed again, even after blood and silence, and all the years that tried to bury it. When the barn was finished, she opened it to the children, taught them to ride, showed them how to mend things, how to patch a fence, how to spot the difference between a bluff and a promise. Some asked why she never left. She told them simply, "Because I was never done." And in late spring, when the roses bloomed again, wild, without warning, she understood something she hadn't before. Justice ends stories. But love keeps telling them.